So welcome to all of you. I just want to start with a general question, which is, what is the meaning of energy transition from where you're standing, and who is left vulnerable by that transition? So maybe, Michelle, I can start with you from National Grid's perspective. We heard a little bit from Ben Wilson this morning about the grid upgrade and what that means for people and consumers. But what does justice mean?
Yeah, so I think from our perspective, as you would have heard from Ben, we are going through a significant upgrade in our grid infrastructure to support a decarbonised energy system, and that really does require a huge effort from us as National Grid, from the transmission operators more broadly, but actually the entire energy industry is going to require a huge kind of upskilling in order to support this transition. I think for us, the transition is really about pace and people, is probably the way I'd put it. So from a pace perspective, we are overhauling the grid in a way that we haven't for a generation. We are building more than 5 times the amount of transmission infrastructure by 2030 than we did in the past kind of 30 years or so. So you get a sense of how much needs to get done and the speed at which it needs to happen. And so that is a real kind of urgency needed from a policy perspective in order to ensure that kind of transition can happen. But obviously we need to do it in a way that brings people with us, and that is a critical part of what we do. So we have to think really carefully about people, and I think that falls into a couple of different categories. So firstly, we've got to think about the people that are impacted by that infrastructure, because we are building nationally significant infrastructure that will benefit the entire country, but it will be located in specific geographies that will impact people in the way they live in those communities. So we have to think really carefully about how we engage people very deeply in the building of that infrastructure, ensuring that they can meaningfully be engaged throughout that process as we consult and build out. So I think that's a kind of large part of it, and I think it's really important that the communities that are impacted by the infrastructure can feel the benefit of that. Now, the government is doing some work and developing its kind of proposition, its offering on community benefit for those communities hosting transmission infrastructure. That's really valuable and really important. We also need to think really long term about that. So what is the kind of legacy of that infrastructure, and how do we bring kind of upskill communities, but also the kind of workforce more broadly to support that? There's a huge opportunity in terms of hundreds of thousands of jobs to build the infrastructure, and in the energy industry more broadly. So actually upskilling the workforce, which is aging and does have challenges in terms of diversity, there's a huge opportunity to bring people with us in that way and build up that workforce.
Great, thanks, Michelle. Ben, Ørsted is working a lot on offshore wind, similar big infrastructure builds out in particular parts of the country. How do you see energy justice?
Yeah, it's really interesting listening to what you're saying, because we are very much in the same place in the sense that we're both building big infrastructure projects. Those of you who don't know us, Ørsted, we build quite a lot of offshore wind and some other assets as well. We've invested, I think, about £14 billion in UK infrastructure, energy infrastructure. Another 16 billion in the next 5 years is as we plan it. Exactly the same challenges that you've heard about. We need to build out the energy transition by building infrastructure. We need to do it now, and we need to do it right. And I think both of those are a challenge just at the moment. We heard about the need for community engagement. Absolutely. We might build offshore, but there's a lot going on offshore. We're not the only people in the offshore space. It affects other industries, whether that is fishing, whether that is shipping, whether that is defence. Lots of different aspects of society that are affected by what we do. Gets a whole lot more challenging onshore. We're building a project right now which has a cable route all the way through Norfolk down to Norwich from the north coast. Big challenge, very similar to some of the challenges that National Grid is facing. So really important that we learn how to meet with, and I don't just mean sit in a room, I mean meet properly with local communities who are affected by this and need to feel their voices are heard and their concerns are properly addressed. More widely, I think those who are left vulnerable are obviously the energy poor, of which we have a depressingly large number in the UK. We need to make sure that policy looks after them. We also need to recognise that they need to be taken care of if we're going to make progress. We can't deliver an energy transition like the last one. We saw what happened in the coal mining communities in the last energy transition away from coal. And I think that's a really important reminder that we need to think about those legacy sectors in the energy space. I like to think of oil and gas as a legacy industry. Not everyone in the room would agree with that, but we need to work out how do we bring those skills and those employees who have families and others dependent on them across into our sector, both because we need them, but also because we don't want anyone to be left behind in this journey.
Thanks, Benj. I mean, and you mentioned, for example, this the last transition from coal to green, but Ana Paula, I mean, on the Iberian Peninsula, EDP, and I think you particularly have been very involved in the challenge of transitioning communities from previous traditional forms of energy to green ones. How does energy justice look like to you on the Iberian Peninsula where you operate?
Well, globally at EDP, we started this journey in leading the energy transition, a just transition, more than 2 decades ago. And we came from 20% of our energy coming from green sources. And currently, we are already over 85%, this year going over 90%, and aiming to be 100% green by 2030. And so this means that regarding the energy transition, the just energy transition, we need to guarantee, on one hand, that we focus a lot on innovation, on the new technologies that can lead us to this energy transition. Also really about the community engagement, where we have several experiences, and also in terms of access to energy. How do we guarantee that there are so many differences all across the globe that the North and the South will not fracture during the period that we'll do our targets up to 2050. So in our case, we are investing more than 25 billion euros up to 2026 into renewable energies to really guarantee that we are making this transition. And I believe that our use case is quite unique, because you gave the example of the Iberian Peninsula, but we had both in Portugal, in Spain, and in Brazil, coal power plants that all of them are shutting down up to 2025, several of them already shut it down. And what we guaranteed was really that we made a transition from coal to green. And so we are creating green hubs that have 4 components. They have green hydrogen, storage, flexibility, and also renewable projects development, guaranteeing that in 100% of the cases, we are converting these power plants into new projects. And to do that, we really need to work together with our employees to really guarantee that we make the transition, either upskilling, reskilling these employees, some of them that are not exactly located in the same regions, also through entrepreneurship programs, where we have also provided them with different jobs in the ones that we have shut it down, and to really guarantee that we work with the communities in several of the projects that we have to really guarantee that they understand what the new projects are about, and that we take other suppliers, other partners that operate with us in those regions in this journey. So we have 1 green hub in Portugal, 4 in Spain, and we are also deploying a project in Brazil in a previous power plant that we had in Pecém of also transitioning into green hydrogen. So it's a very different set of projects that we need to work together as an ecosystem with authorities, with local stakeholders, with our employees, to really guarantee that we are making these projects bringing value into the world, into the community, and guaranteeing that we do this hand in hand with all the agents of the ecosystem.
Great. I mean, there's such amazing technical opportunities to take brownfield sites and upgrade them. But as I say, so much of that is also interacting with the people in the workforce and the community to bring them up to speed. Tara, both Ana Paula and Benj have talked about, and Michelle talked about the role of technology. Kraken, obviously, at the cutting edge, and has been part of the octopus movement of moving from a high technology and taking over the market in the UK, largely through cost reductions, at the same time making things sustainable. Those 2 elements seem to be very important to sustainability. Can you talk a little bit about high tech and the impact that that's having on justice?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Thank you.
I think the first thing to say about energy justice is it's a human thing, not a technology thing. So it's about the way that we go into the energy transition with the mindset that we want to innovate and change for the better. So I think there's been a lot of speakers today talking about how the technologies are converging, and that we can have one operating system for energy that connects many different innovations together. And customers and people like ourselves just need to understand what's happening around us. There is a big period of disruption. It's very exciting. It can be better than the old system we currently have. And all of the technologies that we have, whether it's the ability to be able to connect data, to inform customers when to use their energy, if it's the ability to give heat pumps away free with government grants, if it's the ability to mobilize 600,000 customers to turn their energy down at different times of the day or night, or to use their cars as energy sources, or to create communities that have fan clubs that look up at the wind turbine that goes green when energy is cheap. These are all human problems to solve. They're not solved through the technology. They're led by the technology. And I think one of the things for me in Kraken is we focus on the software, the operating platforms. We enable our clients to leapfrog from old systems to new systems. But we also empower them with an agile mindset and a human mindset, a caring and compassionate mindset to actually tackle some of the biggest problems that we face through a human and a technology lens.
Great, thanks. Elizabeth, we've heard about engaging with different kinds of communities. Women have such an important role to play both in the production and consumption of clean energy and the energy transition. Can you talk to us a little bit about the role of women in that entire process and what energy or transition justice can mean in the context of gender?
Yes, certainly. So women aren't as strong physically as men, and also we have spent so many thousands of years being ignored that we spend a lot of time working out alternative ways of being heard or influencing. So when you hire women engineers in your programs, they're not necessarily going to go straight at something hard and fast. They're going to think around the subject, and they may say, well, hang on, have you thought about doing this? And we know that balanced teams of both men and women result in the best outcomes. And this is always seen on the bottom line. So it's in the interests of energy companies to employ as many women engineers as they have men, because they will get that diversity of thought and also innovation. But equally, any organisation that's serving a community should represent the community it serves. And as women, if there's a choice between the very flash electric car and the little petrol runabout, it's usually going to be the woman who's going to have the petrol runabout, whereas actually it might be more efficient for the main breadwinner of the family, of whatever sex, to have the petrol runabout, because the person who's running the kids to school or doing the grocery shopping or going and seeing all the relatives who need care might be more efficient with an electric vehicle. You've also got to think about, we were talking about this earlier, about communities in terms of, I'm glad that Ben was talking about the mining communities, because what happened there was that communities that had cheap fuel because they got free coal, they lost their livelihoods, they lost their community, and they were just completely stamped on by government. And that 40 years later still remains. And I lived in Mansfield in Nottinghamshire for a while that happened. And I think that actually, if this would be a great way to regenerate those exact communities that were jeopardized by the previous energy transition, if you put the infrastructure in locally there and then also allow them to have cheap energy as a direct result, then that will be beneficial, because a lot of the more middle-class communities don't want their view ruined. Personally, I love a great wind farm, love a turbine in Swaffham, it's fantastic. I suspect in the Middle Ages they were saying, I'm not having that windmill up my road. I know we get cheap grain, but actually it looks a bit of a blight on the landscape. I come from Norfolk, I'm allowed to say that. But equally, I think if you've got middle-class communities that don't want to have the infrastructure and they're forcing it into the working class and more deprived communities, let's make that a benefit so that the engineers and the construction workers and the jobs are there, but also cheap energy so that these people can absolutely benefit from the transition.
Thanks very much. And, we talk about middle class, we talk about people in England, but clearly women in the developing world are also on the forefront of energy transition, about the effects of climate change, but also the effects of polluting energy. Particularly, I'm thinking about things like clean cooking. How are women impacted in the developing world, and what do we have to think about in that context?
Well, they have a huge impact because they're doing a lot more of the cooking and cleaning and working around family home. They did some experiments in the developing world, I'm sure other people might remember this, where they actually, a lot of the women didn't want to stop cooking over open wood fires because they said the food tasted differently. So they actually started cooking on more efficient fires, and they found blind taste testing, they couldn't tell the difference. So that is making a difference. But it is the fact that you cannot just say, we're looking at it from a white Western opportunity situation, however difficult that is for some communities in the UK and in other developed nations. You've got to start thinking about what's that going to mean. And in the same way that in Africa, the mobile phone technology really allowed communities to flourish because you couldn't put in a national grid of telephony, I think you could probably do something quite similar with small grids of solar and other renewable sources. That, again, you bring in the women in, you're going to get a lot of acceptance from the whole community.
Great, thank you. You know, I want to keep talking about solutions. We talked a little bit about technology, but particularly to, you know, Michelle, Benj, and Anna, who are invested in really building out so much infrastructure. What do you see to be sort of the challenges around workforce development and the role of policy in guiding that kind of human capital and reskilling that kind of change?
Yeah, so if I start, I think really for us, there is a huge kind of gap in terms of the workforce. We are one infrastructure sector looking to build out at significant pace, but we're not the only infrastructure sector. We're kind of seeing a build phase across multiple different sectors. So I think that creates a real kind of squeeze on the resources that are available. So absolutely that's a significant challenge. I think I'd probably take the policy question in a couple of different ways. There's a broader question about how does policy support the pace at which we need to build out. And there are, you know, lots of areas where essentially the frameworks that we are working within are fine if you are not looking to build out at such quite the pace that we are, but they are not set up for the volumes of projects that are going through. So things like the planning system, it is rather kind of clunky and does require elements of reform in order to support us getting a bit quicker. Similarly, the way in which projects connect to the grid, the frameworks there need to change. And we also need the regulatory framework set up in the right way to ensure that we can kind of build and invest ahead of need. There's a lot of progress happening in those spaces. That's really important. But we just need to really kind of keep the kind of the momentum going so that we can develop those policy changes quickly. I think from a workforce perspective, I think I wouldn't actually, there's a lot that the government can do and regulators, but actually there's a huge amount that industry can do working with government and working with each other. And I think from our perspective, this is really a kind of collaborative effort between the regulator, the government and industry, and collaboration within industry to support that. So something that, you know, we're doing is working much more collaboratively with our supply chain, for example, about taking a more strategic approach to that workforce development. So there are lots of different ways in which this can be solved.
Benj, Ørsted used to be Danish oil and natural gas. Your company has gone through a massive transformation. Maybe you can talk a little.
Yeah, so we absolutely, 2016, I think it was, 2017, we pivoted from black to green overnight, moved out of fossil fuels and became a pure play renewable energy company. And our business requires skills that we can't find. There is a huge skills shortage, whether it's building the grid, whether it's building wind farms or whatever it is. And I think one of the things that we're finding is the need to find those skills, develop those skills in partnership with communities. Whether that we've got a big base in Grimsby, about 600 people in a town that's really been struggling. We've invested quite heavily in raising aspirations, raising expectations in the sort of teenage years, so that those people now aspire to work in the kinds of jobs that we need to fill. And of course that means apprenticeship. So you talk about policy. Yeah, policy is important, but I would completely agree. This is an industry challenge and an industry opportunity, and I think it's up to us to engage with those communities that are potentially being left behind, or frankly we're always behind, and bring them on the journey. There's a huge opportunity to provide jobs that no one had thought about a decade ago. And we simply haven't got enough people. You talk about planning, we're desperately short of environmental scientists, for example. We need to find ways to encourage more people into this space. And I think that can be done in communities where there is the most need for upskilling and for increasing aspiration.
And Paula, I mean, across the various jurisdictions that your company is working in, how have you worked with the governments and with policy in those areas to engage in the kind of transition, particularly again, the people in those communities and how you help educate.
I think it's very, very relevant what you were mentioning in terms of the workforce and also in terms of policy. So very briefly, on the workforce, for us it's really about two things. One is how we train and how we develop our people. And in that part, technology really plays an important role, because when we are converting our skillful workers from hydropower plants or prior thermal plants into projects that we develop in green hubs, it's really how do we train them in hydrogen competencies, and in that part, artificial intelligence and how they are able to search the information, it will accelerate that path. And also at the same time, when we have people in the control centers, those control centers, when you have it for other types of technologies, you will be able to use them and those competencies in terms of hydrogen. So for us, it was really about training our people and having a plan where we do this conversion and this training, and also working with the local communities in terms of finding local pipelines of talent that we can have, both internally and with our partners, guaranteeing them that we train them towards that just transition. On the part of policy, I totally agree with my colleagues that it is really important that we work all together between different companies, between regulators, between governments. And I would highlight probably 4 things that today are quite important. The first one is previsibility and stability in terms of the policies that we have for the investments. In many of these areas, we are talking about significant investments, and if you don't have previsibility in terms of the investments that you are making, and the last 2 years have been quite turbulent in terms of the sector will not be able to place those type of investments. The second thing is, especially regarding new technologies, like hydrogen, for example, the combination of funds that you need to have between the different funds that you have in the different geographies, both at European level, national level. And there is still a lot of uncertainty regarding that combination and the respective timelines. The third one is permitting. When we are transposing, for instance, RED 3 in terms of the different markets, it's really important, not just like the number of years that you take to license your projects, but it's really how you are making people on the ground, digitizing processes to really guarantee that collectively we accelerate significantly the time to market in terms of those projects. And lastly, it's also about these new technologies will require different things from the grids, and so the type of investment and the type of flexibility that we'll have on the grids is also important for many of these projects. So I believe that regulation and policy, it's a key factor, and we need to work collectively, especially when we navigate crises, to really guarantee that we don't compromise the long term with short-term measures that, being defined ad hoc, might compromise what you are doing in terms of the end game.
Great. That's fabulous. I mean, we'll come back to Tara in just a moment on some of those last topics, but just sticking to the workforce issue, Elizabeth, you know, you're the CEO of the Women's Engineering Society. Can you speak a little bit more about how we increase the role of women in the workforce around new energy projects? And is there a role for policy and government in that process?
Well, I would say, so yes, many women, work is not just a job, it's got to have a purpose. And the energy transition to green energy, to say, you know, we're caring for the planet, we're nurturing, is actually something that I think a lot of women can buy into. And so when you get politicians who are talking about, oh, the green rubbish, or they don't really want to go into that, maybe for either political reasons or because of funding reasons, to actually be able to say to, you know, women saying that the green transition is good for everybody is actually going to benefit. But more than that, we've only got 16.5% of all engineers in the UK are women. Now that does represent nearly 1 million people, so nearly 1 million women. But as a woman going into the engineering industry, you have to be very determined. You have to be very good as a result, because it's just so much easier to say, do you know what? I'll quit, or I'll work in marketing or HR. And we're losing all of that absolute fantastic ingenuity and ability for women to come in and inspire other people. We've been around for 105 years. We were founded just after the First World War. And I think that because engineering is so male-dominated, we don't see it on television. You know, when you've got a murder mystery, the husband of the victim is a lawyer or an accountant or a doctor. You never see an engineer. So people don't know what engineering is. They think of it as car mechanics or people who fix boilers. And those are great jobs, but they're not engineering, because it's about problem solving. It's about creativity, all things that women love to get involved in.
Thank you. Tara, I promised I was going to come back to you. A couple of questions. One, it would be great to hear from Kraken's perspective how you're working with local communities in the way that we've been discussing here. But I also did want to come back to this question of energy poverty and addressing energy poverty as energy justice. And so I'd love to hear your views on those two.
Yeah, so I think Kraken, many of our clients adopt Kraken because it enables them to create these innovative products quicker and faster. And many of those clients are also completely committed to the communities in which they serve. And they want to be able to provide ideas and ways of using renewable energy that customers love, right? That will actually easily transition to. It's not a case of big behavior change. It's fun, it's interactive, and it's ways of creating the change that people want to see, so engaging with new products and services, so whether that's wind turbines or solar panels. For customers, it's kind of a no-brainer, right? They're cheaper. It's as long as I get my head around it, how my house is going to work, and you're going to give me something that's really cool and easy to use, and I can use that to save money for my family, I'm kind of all in, right, as a customer. So for us, it's enabling clients that use our operating platform to not just transition their technology from being an energy provider, but actually transitioning their mindset to being somebody that actually is delivering a societal outcome, which is supporting communities to transition through what is a disruptive change for all of us. But will also enable us to connect many other innovative products. So I happen to have a background, I was actually ex-Tesla service as well, so I've kind of been in a disruptive space for a long time, and I've seen these technologies converging before my eyes, and I've even served customers in both places for Octopus as a director in Octopus Energy, but also in Kraken and on the platform and in Tesla. I can see it all coming together. So I think for customers, they can see the same. So sometimes we add this complexity to this energy landscape that we talk about, but actually it's quite connected to the future of what we will all see, and it will be better than what we have today. So I think for clients, it's actually the technology enables them to solve human problems, and those human problems are, how do I support those most in need? How do I create products and services that support those that can't afford to? And you know, some of the customer behavior that I've seen is just amazing. Through the energy crisis, we created a experience which was called the dirty light down, which is basically customers could connect with a very fun way to turn their lights off. And we had pictures of customers, all tongue-in-cheek, doing all kinds of things to save energy, you know, lectures to kids, everything else. But we also had customers that contacted us during that period to want to give to others, and were actually, any money that was based on the credit in their accounts, we set up a charity, and customers actually gave to each other. So at the base of who we are, like as a human societal group, we want to embrace this change. This is not a change that anyone will fight, as long as we create the easy to use, cheaper than, better than solutions for customers. Whether we regulate it or not, they'll pull what we need. You know, if you think about, Uber, Tesla, all these disruptive smartphones, they're vertical S-curves. They're not long S-curves that took 10 years. They're 2 or 3, 3-year S-curves. And we're there. We're in that disruption space right now. So the technologies will get pulled by the people with the right mindset that want to start to connect this future of energy, and that's what Kraken enables you to do.
Great, thanks so much, Sharon. I think the new forays into really frontier markets like Sierra Leone are going to put a lot of that to the test when it comes to energy justice. Great. Well, I'm sorry to say that this was a relatively short panel in the schedule, but I'm so happy that all of you could join us. So Michelle Hubert, Ben Sykes, Ana Paula Marquez, Tara Mullen, and Elizabeth Donnelly, thanks so much for joining us.